Hello. This is a talk I gave last week at a small conference in Palm Springs, the Ciati Hydropower Conference. It's super niche, one of my favorites, really, really great group of people. And a number of people, we're all sick of hearing about AI. It's bombarding us in the news. Its tentacles are reaching into the products we use every day. My browser just prompted me to ask me if I wanted to use it to group tabs with AI. Sure. Why? Uh, in spite of that, people really enjoyed the conversation and asked me to record this so they could share it internally with their teammates. So here we go. I started off the talk with an innocent, very, very simple question. Just kidding. Philosophers have been struggling with this one for millennia. I asked the attendees, what are the necessary ingredients from which intelligence can form? And there were really great, a number of really great ideas. What I proposed was there are two things: a goal, right, some objective, and a loop. Loops are the process of iteration, right? If you're familiar with Gödel, Escher, Bach, the strange loop from which meaning can emerge. Goals are the objective that the loop is optimizing for. If you look at biology, right, the goal was to maximize offspring survival or some quotient of life, and the loop was a life. This is important. If we want to create intelligence artificially, we need these two ingredients, and we need to be cognizant of what that goal is. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm CEO of a pretty unique organization, Upstream Tech. I'm a computer scientist and engineer by training, father of genuine intelligence, Meadow Mutino. I've worked at big tech companies, tiny startups, and I think throughout my career, I've really felt like I'm a technology pragmatist, right? Someone who doesn't want to do technology for technology's sake, but really wants to find something that's useful and create things that are useful and solve real problems with real impact. And right now we're kind of in this age of tech bubbles. I hope that I can provide a perspective that balances out the massive hype surrounding AI. So I'm going to talk about the real promise of AI, a promise that I believe has been obfuscated by recent hype. I'm going to caution you as maybe current or potential consumers of this technology and outline where it has and may continue to go afoul. And finally, I'm going to talk about the opportunities that I am most excited about when it comes to specifically energy, climate, and water. So the promise. AI is not new. It's been around for decades. The field has, of course, advanced massively over the years, but the ambition and vision has largely remained the same. And it's not even the first time that we've been promised an imminent AI revolution or transformation. But before looking backwards, I want to define this term transformative AI. It refers to an inflection point comparable to the agricultural or industrial revolution, which, hell yeah, probably good for humanity. Depends on your perspective. If you kind of look at humanity's endeavor to just increase overall intelligence or capacity for problem solving, cool. A lot of details to work out around wealth concentration, mitigating existential threats, if you're a fan of the paperclip exercise. But let's call that beyond the scope of this talk. Current best guesses from a bunch of different sources that I looked through seem to be guessing somewhere between 2040 and 2050 for this inflection point of transformative AI based on the kinds of needs of energy consumption, data volume, compute throughput. So the question to ask is this idea new, right? Is this something that we're looking at now with the big recent breakthroughs as feeling imminently possible? Well, Simon won the Nobel Prize for Economics and the Turing Award for Computer Science, which is a pretty incredible double threat. And yet, in 1965, he posited that transformative AI would be available in 20 years. Minsky was the co-founder of MIT's AI lab. I recently went to their museum. You can see the photo in the background. Within a generation, the problem of creating artificial intelligence will be substantially solved. So that was 1967. So what happened? These are not chumps tweeting their AI hot takes on Twitter or X. These are some of the most brilliant people in the history of AI and computer science. And bonus round, this happened again in the 80s. Again, the general kind of hype was that we were on the cusp of some transformation. This is my favorite artifact from that period, Sega's AI computer that promised natural language processing and artificial intelligence via its Prolog interpreter, which is like, come on, we need computers to look like this again. But I digress. So AI winters, that's the term, looking back, that we apply to these two cases where there was kind of a drawdown in annual global investment, public interest evaporated, and it really comes down to one thing in both of these cases: ambitious claims and a failure to produce formidable results. So we need to ask ourselves the following question: is this time different? Are we headed for another winter? And at first glance, like, sure, it must be different this time. We got the fastest computers and GPUs, and we got big data centers and the cloud, for crying out loud. But it's worth digging in. So let's talk about generative AI. I assume that if you're watching this, you've probably at least heard of ChatGPT, Gemini, Nay, Bard, Bing, and most likely even tried it out. So when I polled the audience at the conference, how many people have conversed with a large language model? Almost everyone raised their hand. Who's using it regularly? Much smaller group. Who's using it regularly for work? I think it was just a handful of people. So it's definitely penetrating, the general user market, I guess you could call it, in a way that's pretty impressive. But I don't think that folks have really identified how they plan to or choose to use the tool on a regular basis. So first, just backing up, large language models, they're enabled by a scale of computation and training data that was previously either not possible or not pursued. Sam Altman quoted, I believe, ChatGPT 4's training costs at $100 million US. And they're powerful, absolutely. Are they useful? Also, yes, but I think I and many others are arguing that not in the general transformative ways that the marketing materials promise. And of course, Hall of Fame XKCD on the right there about stirring data to get your machine learning models to do good. So there are a number of things that large language models are really good at, involving text transformation, generation, and I actually love some of the accessibility features that are made possible by large language models. Microsoft published a paper right at the announcement of ChatGPT titled "Sparks of General Intelligence." And thinking back to the beginning of this talk, what were the requirements for intelligence? Right? We had a loop and a goal. So what is a large language model's goal? What is the goal of any of these generative models? And I think as we go through the examples, that will become clear. And a Stanford paper quickly followed Microsoft's, a while ago, and stated that the glimmers and sparks you see of intelligence, those are a mirage. So let's dish the dirt, so to speak. This is the fun stuff or the extremely scary stuff, depending on your perspective. There are some juicy lawsuits going on right now in AI land, one with you know who, and a more important one with the New York Times. In order to apply the power of massive computing to create large language models, you need a massive quantity of data. So the language models consume text, the image ones, imagery. They gobble it up, right? Digital libraries, the written internet, video transcripts, etc. A problem arises. Does one get to consent to their data being used as input to these models? What if the resulting large language model produces content that has not glimmers of intelligence, but glimmers of plagiarism? And that's at the heart of this lawsuit. The New York Times was able to engineer prompts to ChatGPT that output verbatim passages from articles that they had written or published. So large language models and image generating models currently prevent plagiarized output by using what's called a system prompt, or at least at the time of my research. And a system prompt is literally a prompt, a text prompt provided to the model before you talk to it that says, "Pretty please, do not show copyright characters. Do not be mean. Do not do bad things." Blah, blah, blah. And they're super long. The one I found was just massive. DALL-E, an image generating model, will not show you SpongeBob SquarePants. But if you ask for animated sponge, you see. The second, challenge is it's not right. Correctness is an important one. We want the answers given by algorithms to be correct in general. I think that's a pretty fair thing to say. Large language models invent references that don't exist but sound right, facts that aren't real, etc. A phenomenon that's cutely referred to as a hallucination. And hallucination is troublesome, but especially when folks are using large language models to make code, which has been touted as one of the killer features. This is a blog that I follow, citing that the large language model Copilot introduced a subtle and major bug into their system. So if any manager out there is suggesting you start slapping LLM code into your infrastructure so that code go fast, be careful. You need a very experienced developer at the helm of that ship. I love this one. Asked ChatGPT to use text characters, aka ASCII art, to draw a picture and rate it, and it produces pretty hilarious output. This is a running unicorn, 9 out of 10. I agree. This section in shitification is probably the scariest. That we should be very worried about this. The question is, what happens when generating bullshit costs next to nothing? Content generation is a facet of capitalism, but it's being flooded to an unimagined degree with empty drivel generated by large language models. Stepping back, when you ask ChatGPT to do something that goes against its system prompt or terms of use, it will respond with a pretty predictable slap on the wrist. It goes against OpenAI's content policy, blah, blah, blah. And if you search that on Twitter, well, there are a lot of people who are asking OpenAI's ChatGPT to generate text that goes against their policy. Oh, and it doesn't end on Twitter. Same for Amazon, right? Blue tent. Sorry, but I can't generate a response to that in blue. And very overpriced tent, $559. Pollution for SEO optimization and minor profit. And it's not just replacing humans because it's better, it's just cheaper. I came across a fact the other day that blew my mind. Amazon had to cap the number of self-published books an author could submit to 3 per day. 3 per day, which I think really illustrates the challenge. And it's scary because large language models are going to start training on this new large language model generated data influx. It's effectively poisoning the well. I've heard it referred to as eating the seed cord. Bad news. It gets worse. Large language models and generative visual models are being used to pump out content for young children. It's uncanny at the surface. It appears real to parents, but the videos are strange. They don't make sense at times. They're like being brainwashed. And I'm a new parent. It scares me. It's the first time in humanity's history where our children are being exposed to unchecked machine generated content and extremely well SEO optimized content to boot. We're going to put a pin in that because yikes. I will cap off my enshedification section with this priceless one. Academic papers, peer-reviewed academic papers, have some of the key, ChatGPT keywords. Certainly, here's a possible is a telltale sign. This is a real paper, and as of the date of the talk I gave last week, still totally accessible. So, enshadification, seriously. To close out this subsection, this whole trend really reminds me of Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons. Except instead of consuming natural resources, we're poisoning something intangible and cultural. I mentioned hallucinations. One paper recently showed that they are inevitable, given the structure of the models. Quote, by employing results from learning theory, we show that large language models cannot learn all of the computable functions and will therefore always hallucinate. And last, this is maybe behind my little head bubble, bias. Large language models are starting to be used for tasks like recruitment, right? Screen all of the resumes. Early applications and research have revealed difficult to inspect biases, such as preference for male candidates, and none of us should be surprised, right? In this example, it gave points for baseball or basketball, but took off points for softball. It's a bad future. What's troubling is that the architectures employed in these large language models are really opaque, just at the level of complexity. They're difficult to understand, and when we're trying to apply these at scale, it becomes really hard to question an individual response or decision. And that's not true for, I will just say, not true for all machine learning, all AI, right? There are ways to make a model more understandable. The last thing I want to show is a quick video, OpenAI's new Sora video generation model. It's impressive. I mean, this is pretty incredible. But the first thing that people asked me was, hey, Marshall, does this understand how the world works? Like, it seems like people are walking and, there's like bouncing fabric physics almost. But that is not the case, right? In a second, I believe we'll see this person's legs do like a 360, 360 rotation, right? One of the things that these models are still quite weak at is cause and effect, physics, etc. And they're on the Sora page, they're cited as weaknesses. So backing up to the question I posed about what are these kinds of models' goal, I don't believe that they're to have understand how the world works or gain a level of intelligence, it is really to produce plausible output, right? Whether it's a large language model, DALL-E, the video generation, Sora, right? Produce something that is going to be plausible for the prompt. And when you look at it through that lens, thinking back to that Stanford paper, right, it really is a mirage. It is a mirage of understanding, a mirage of intelligence. At Upstream Tech, we have something called Hack Week, where we pause normal non-critical work and pair up in teams to hack on something new. We wanted to say, okay, we all have our doubts with large language models, but can we do something interesting? So David and Phil, two of Hydro Forecast, one of our product's most senior team members, wanted to see if we could leverage large language models to help us assess if one of our forecasts needs human review. So Hydro Forecast is a product that creates forecasts for hydrology. So it will say, for example, over the next X days, this is the expected flow of water through this river. And it uses AI, but a very different kind of AI. We started by seeing if we could engineer prompts such that we could ask simple questions about a forecast, providing to the model the data in text form, which you could see on the right here. And that was pretty cool. Not super interesting, but pretty cool. It definitely responded in a way that were plausible for a hydrologist type person. However, when we started to try to use it to flag whether or not a forecast needed review, it basically said that every forecast should be reviewed, and the kinds of notes it made were not super relevant to that question, should we review it? They were just plausible observations about the forecast. That said, there were a couple of interesting glimmers that we may look further into. But in the end, we decided that we were struggling to try to get prompts that made it respond in the right way. And it would be much easier for us to build a rule-based system that we had full control and insight into. Because a large language model wasn't trained with the goal of anomaly detection at its core, or with any inputs that were hydrologically relevant. It just wasn't the right tool for the job. So maybe just stepping back to recap this section, takeaways. Super powerful demonstrations, maybe in some cases useful as human in the loop creative tools, or AI in the loop, depending on how you want to frame that. Use verbatim output at your own peril, especially for code, but for everything. When Microsoft launched the Xbox, they didn't talk about the GPU, the wafer lithography, right? They talked about the video games. For the iPhone announcement, they talked about the kinds of things you could do with it, right? Listen to music, browse the web. They didn't talk about, how they waterproofed the headphone jack. Blockchain and large language models have something in common, which is an obsession with the minor details that users don't care about, the minor technical details. If you go to OpenAI's website, you'll see what I mean. And I think this is because they don't know what the valuable use case is. Thinking back to transformative AI, recall that we need a lot of computation, a lot of power, and a lot of data. And when I say power, I mean energy. I think that we'll have the necessary computation and power. My biggest question is with the data, especially with the current trend of enshittification. What scale of quality data will be used beyond the current tech demos? I do not know. What is being left on the table? I do not know. I'm going to skip this one just in the interest of time, but I do recommend you go check out Richard Sutton and his article, A Bitter Lesson. So I propose two buckets for our AI application: broad AI and narrow AI. So while broad AI is clearly powerful and promising, and gives glimmers of what the future may hold, narrow AI focuses on a narrow and specific goal or task. So right now, media, publications, the news, marketing, it's referring to AI specifically for broad AI, right? These generative models. Narrow AI typically fades into the background, right? We forget that it's AI because it's working well and it works for a specific task. I believe that there remain so many ready opportunities to apply narrow AI to solve real problems and to solve them well. The late John McCarthy, one of the founders of the discipline of artificial intelligence, lamented, "As soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore." Larry Tesler, a computer science legend, declared, "AI is whatever hasn't been done yet." Fusion modeling, cooling systems, voice to text, facial recognition, spam filtering, recommendation algorithms. These are all narrow AI. Spam filter. No one's writing about AI, spam filter being a killer feature of AI, but it's true, right? It just works well. It's worked well for a very long time. Energy has a massive untapped potential for applying narrow AI. There's huge room for improvement in renewable forecasting, except for hydrology, which is what we do. That's solved. Just kidding. Always room for improvement. There's interesting room to optimize the grid, right? Forecast demand, incredibly challenging problem. Predict maintenance, right? Understand records, streamline just the processes, the drudgery of operations. And it's super exciting to have the opportunity to work with organizations to leverage their internal expertise and data to train models that result in them operating the best possible model for their task. Of course, hydro forecast, that's what we do. Again, forecasting how much water will flow through a river. It's powerful, right? This is an example where narrow AI can go further and do better than existing conceptual models. This was a competition a while back that pitted us against in-house utility forecasting teams, government agencies, other vendors. And this was not long after we had invented hydro forecast. And yet it outperformed in almost every category against the other forecast models. And this is I'm showing this not as a sales pitch, but as a key example of where if you have a specific goal, right, forecast how much water will go through rivers, you can use AI in a narrow sense to do that better than has ever been done before. So how do we wrap this up? Transformative AI is coming at some point. Whether we find the fusion energy and $6 trillion that Sam Altman is looking for, I'm not sure. I and others are still trying to find the killer app of generative AI that prove it has viable commercial staying power. If that doesn't materialize, like the other bubbles before it, it will pop. But I'm sure that narrow AI is here, ready to go today. And the answers it provides are in a whole different class of reliability and utility. I just like this painting, so I threw it in. I'll leave you with a quote from Professor Noam Chomsky and friends. "Intelligence is not something $100 million can buy. There's a beauty to the loops, the abstractions that form the goal, the mystery of the consciousness. Intelligence isn't just the next great economic boom, maybe, by unchecked efficiency gains. Intelligence is elegant. Intelligence is sacred. The human mind is a surprisingly efficient and even elegant system that operates with small amounts of information. It seeks not to infer brute correlations among data, but to create explanations." Thank you. If you're interested in this stuff, get in touch. I probably said a lot of things that are incorrect. Feel free to correct me and reach out. Thanks.